Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. My name is Steven Railston and we're recording this episode on a Monday morning, 2 days after Manchester United lost in the Community Shield on penalties against Manchester City. It was a 1-1 draw at Wembley. Garnacho scored for around 10 minutes to go. Probably thought he'd scored the match winner. City equalised at the death and won on penalties. I'm joined by Samuel Luckhurst. Samuel, it's one of those games where it's a glorified friendly if you lose. But if you win, you're probably quite happy going into the new season. I thought there was plenty of positives to take from the game though. Obviously United lost in the end, but Bruno Fernandes was outstanding as usual. Garnacho was brilliant off the bench and Ahmad was really, really good as well on the right wing. What were your initial thoughts on the game before we get into it in a bit more detail?
Similar to that, it was a game with plenty of positives, and Ten Hag said that afterwards at his post-match press conference. I mean, Fernandes and Garnacho started how they ended last season. I thought Fernandes was pretty quiet but busy in the first half, but his influence in the second half just became more and more profound. And I'd imagine a lot of footballers, if they'd scored a goal like he scored and then to have it disallowed, they'd kind of fade and fall to the margins of the game. But that's not him. He actually became more involved, and that's testament to what a great player he is. And you expect nothing other from that, from him either. And with Garnacho, it was a bonus for Ten Hag to be able to call upon him from the substitutes bench. It was actually the first time he was on the bench since the City home game in October last year. He, of course, had that run of 38 consecutive games as a starter, and I can understand why Ten Hag decides to ease him in. Of course, it was about that balance of getting tour players starting and players who weren't on tour, but certainly he felt they were durable, or certainly that they were needed in the case of Lisandro Martinez due to the depleted defence. But Garnacho is just such a positive player. And another thing, I mean, there's plenty to like about him, but he's a right-footed playing on the right wing, and there's this misconception these days that if you're a right-footed winger, you can't play on the right wing, which is nonsense. And he showed why it is a nonsense with the chance he created for Marcus Rashford and the goal that he scored. Ahmad was getting ignored by teammates. He was getting a bit frustrated about it in the first 20 minutes. There were a lot of times when he was in space, and the one time he did get the ball where he wanted it, he really did. Do a number on Josko Vardiol, and then he had that other chance where he really should have scored. He should have been selfish. He should have gone for goal himself. That his performance was a positive. I thought Casemiro I think there's with him, he's possibly a better attacking midfielder than defensive midfielder now these days. He's always had a terrific passing range, but the way he supplemented those attacks on Saturday and the chances he created and some of the passes he sprang to accelerate attacks was extremely impressive. He was another plus. So it was a pretty positive performance. It's a pity for United that, like last season, they scored only to concede quickly, and it was another goal they'd conceded in the final 10 minutes. I lost count of the amount of times that happened last season, and consequently, that's why they didn't end up winning the Community Shield. You'd have hoped for their sake that they'd have been able to turn a page there, but those two issues are still they are still issues coming into this season.
It was a fantastic performance from Garnacho, I thought, off the bench. He scored 10 goals last season, Samuel, which was a great season. And I mean, he was just there every week, wasn't he? Going to the well, pushing his body to the limit. Do you think this year he could actually take his performances and form to another level? Because you see, I think he's put on a little bit of muscle mass now. He looks to have physically matured again, which is natural at that age. Year on year, you are going to physically improve. And I think in terms of his general output in the final third, if he can add a few more goals, a few more assists, maybe look to reach 20 goals and assists for the season, which is obviously possible considering what he got last year. He's just such an exciting player. And I actually think if he was playing for someone else, see if he was playing in the French league or in the Spanish league, I think fans around the world would be getting a lot more excited about him. I don't think he actually gets the credit he deserves. He's 20 years old. How he's performing for United is incredible at his age. And the influence he's starting to have on games, he's just got such a bright future. And I do think he can go up another few knots.
He can. His trajectory has been it's been terrific ever since he came into the first team, ever since he made his debut under Ralph Rangnick. I remember that first pre-season. It was a surprise that it turned out that he hadn't played on the tour because he was late for a meeting, because it gave the impression that his attitude wasn't quite right, when actually he came back early that pre-season in 2022. I think he played in the Toulon tournament, and he didn't take the full 3 weeks that the players were allocated off for summers before coming back in for pre-season. So his attitude has always been, by and large, exemplary. The only wobble was after the Bournemouth game when was that? I think it was April, wasn't it? Bournemouth away, where Ten Hag needed to give him a talking to over his daft social media activity. But he was one of United's best players last season, and he has to start against Fulham. I don't see any rationale for not keeping him on the bench. He's a goal threat. He created a goal. He scored a goal. He was a regular last season. He's got to be a regular this season. Is he among the best players at Manchester United? Yes. Should he be in the starting 11? Yes. I'd say he's probably among maybe 4 players in that team that I look at and think they are good enough for a title-winning Manchester United side. They're in the minority, unfortunately, but he is certainly one of those players. And his goals haul last season was creditable, and he didn't struggle for chances, and that was a theme of his first full season as well. There were times where he would have one-on-ones, he wouldn't quite get it right, but that was part of the learning process, because he was an 18-year-old going on 19, and you are going to hit bumps in the road. I think one that stands out was against Leeds United at home in Ten Hag's first season, when he should have equalised at 1-0 down. And of course, he didn't take it, and Leeds went 2-0 up early in the second half. Then later on that week, it was the reverse fixture due to the fixture quirk at Ellen Road. He comes on having been dropped, and he scores an even tougher chance. And that's just an example from 18 months ago of what an impeccable attitude he has. And he has the right mentality, and his skill set is terrific, and he's a fan favourite, as Kobbie Mainoo is, as Bruno Fernandes is, and Lisandro Martinez as well. And those players are the ones that you really look up. I think if you're a United teammate, you're not one of those players, you're looking to them to not necessarily bail you out, but they're the growing force in that team. I mean, Fernandes is the captain, but the 2 young lads in Garnacho and Mainoo, everyone knows how wonderfully they played last season, and it is another challenge altogether to kick on and have as good as, if not a better season in the upcoming season. But they are 2 players that although their workloads were very taxing last season, and they were probably overburdened due to the injury issues and the poor squad management, not signing the right players and senior personnel letting them down. But they are senior players now. It won't be long until we stop referring to them as youngsters, because they've already attained a great degree of seniority. And again, that's a reflection of their brilliance. And absolutely, when we go to the Fulham game on Friday night, I think just from a purist's perspective, we hope that Garnacho starts.
Yeah, Garnacho can just turn a game on its head. He's got that kind of ability. I mean, you think back to the Boxing Day game against Aston Villa at Old Trafford, when Villa were very comfortable and 2-0 up at half time, and Garnacho was actually playing on the right wing for the first time in his career that night, which interestingly he hadn't done during his time in the academy, and yet he scores 2 goals, gets United back into the game. Obviously, Rasmus Højlund scores his first Premier League goal, and that was a fantastic turnaround. That's just an example of what he can do, and that's why I think it's such a fascinating debate now with Samuel regarding, we're saying Garnacho has to play, he has to start against Fulham. But also, I think Ahmad has to start. We've briefly discussed how impressive Ahmad was. It's just so refreshing when he gets the ball and he takes on players. And he's had a wonderful pre-season. He's had a fantastic summer. And it really feels like he's got momentum now going into the new year. So if Garnacho and Ahmad have to start, then that would mean Marcus Rashford has to make way for one of them. And you'd start Ahmad on the right, Garnacho back in his natural position on the left. So, I mean, a couple of quirks of that. Garnacho's actually been playing better on the right, hasn't he? And then Rashford's performance I actually thought was quite good, with the exception of the chances that he missed. I mean, he should have had 2 goals, and Rashford in 22-23 would have buried those chances. But if you take that away, I actually thought he was quite sharp at Wembley. I think he's looked quite sharp all summer. But I mean, it's a good headache to have for Ten Hag. We're kind of assessing his options going into the Friday game. And there is a conversation now building around, should Rashford start? Should Ahmad start? Which camp would you lean towards?
I'd have Ahmad on the right and Garnacho on the left. And with Rashford, he does look sharp and he looks fit and he's had a full pre-season, and those are three significant pluses. However, people look at pre-season, is it meaningless? Is it meaningful? His only goal was a penalty during pre-season, but I thought his overall performances in excuse me, in the United States were plus from that tour. But that chance, I mean, the first chance was really poorly executed. It was far too casual. I mean, he clearly saw what he wanted to do, but it was never on target. And with the second one, I think it's just, he's one of those players that when the ball falls to him when he has a really good opportunity, you're actually expecting him to miss it rather than to score it. And we'd obviously been discussing Rashford throughout the game and the challenges he could face going into the Fulham game. And of course, if he puts that chance away, then he's on his way for the season, and he's certainly starting against Fulham, I think. But when you've got Ahmad, who's got momentum and he's had a better pre-season, and you've got Garnacho, who was one of United's best players last season, and he was one of their best players in the Community Shield. As I said, he created a brilliant chance for Rashford. He scored a very good goal as well. I don't think it's a difficult decision, but also I don't think Ten Hag is going to rock the boat with Rashford at this point. I think it's a lot easier for him to take Ahmad out of the team, play Bruno Fernandes on the right, or play Garnacho on the right, and Rashford on the left, with Mason Mount behind Bruno Fernandes. I mean, Mason Mount is a different subject altogether, and was someone else who, unsurprisingly, was utterly underwhelming at Wembley on Saturday. But these players, Rashford and Mount, they are very senior players, and after having the seasons that they've had, they've really got to hit the ground running. And both of them were good during pre-season. And when it comes to the Community Shield, I remember Darren Fletcher being asked about it when he was a player, coincidentally ahead of the last time United played in the Community Shield in 2011. And he was asked the question: is it the end of pre-season, or is it the start of the season? He said it was the start of the new season. That's how he treated it. And when you look at, obviously, the intensity of the game was nothing like the FA Cup final. It was, pretty sedate first 10 or 15 minutes, but it is still a competitive game. Garnacho's goal goes towards his goals total for United. You do get a medal. There is an honour to chisel onto the honour. There is a year to chisel onto the honours board for Manchester City, etc. And so there was clearly a rise in intensity from the pre-season games, and it wasn't a surprise to me that Rashford fluffed his lines a couple of times, and it wasn't a surprise to me that Mount all of a sudden started to regress. They're two senior players who, frankly, dodged media duties during the pre-season tour when other players, 22-year-old Ahmad doing a press conference, Anthony doing an interview, very thoughtful interview through a translator. Those players shouldn't be doing those duties. Those duties should be taken on by senior players, British senior players as well. They should be comfortable in that environment, but for whatever reason, they're not. And it already that kind of, I think with Mount, it's been documented before how quiet he's been off the pitch since he joined United. But a proper Man United player, it's not just what you do on the pitch, it's how you conduct yourself off the pitch as well. I mean, I'll go back to the example of, it's a convenient example as well, Ruud van Nistelrooy. I remember when I interviewed him nearly 11 years ago, he said he always spoke to the press after games. I'm sure he maybe embellished that, but there he was as the captain after they got beaten by Lille in the Champions League group stage. In the Champions League group stage, they didn't qualify from, having just been battered 4-1 at Middlesbrough a few days earlier. And he's there in the mix zone, and he's fronting up, and he's giving a brilliant copy, and he's speaking articulately and very passionately about the problems at Man United. And that was during a real crisis under Sir Alex Ferguson back in November 2005. Mount and Rashford have had it, comparatively easy in comparison to what Van Nistelrooy went through there. And yeah, I think you do kind of tend to take things from their character when they're that quiet off the pitch. And clearly there's been a shift there for whatever reason. I mean, a few of us spoke to Rashford on the eve of the League Cup final, and he was a very engaging talker. And I think others that have spoken to him before would say likewise. But clearly, there are some issues to address there, and maybe those two players are waiting for their form to recover to strike when the iron is hot, so to speak. But unfortunately, their performances individually at the weekend, they both regress.
Somebody who does always front up and speak very well. I think we can all agree he's the best talker in the squad is Bruno Fernandes. Unfortunately, we didn't get anyone in the mix on leaving Wembley, but Fernandes just looked and said, "Look, I'm sorry, I've spoke to everyone else," and that's always appreciated if you have the politeness just to say, "No, sorry, not today." It's a nice thing to do from the players. He's going to sign a new contract, Samuel. Very well deserved, I'd say, but it's interesting because his current deal expires in 2027, so there's not exactly a clamour to get a new deal over the line, and it's only going to be extended by a year, potentially. But on the flip side, Fernandes has been the best player in the post-Sir Alex Ferguson era. He embodies those standards. He's a throwback to the United players of the past. He's just such a magnificent footballer, and every time I watch him, I just seem to be more impressed. And I think the biggest compliment you can give him is he performs wherever he plays in the pitch. He's in the false nine on Saturday, and he still had influence over the game. I mean, that shot he took, that was obviously ruled out for offside, was just wonderful, wasn't it? It was kind of reminiscent of the goal he scored against Liverpool, which was of similar quality when he struck it first time. And interestingly, I don't know if you remember, because we were speaking during the game, but I interviewed Joe Lewis, who is an aging goalkeeper. He was in a United training last season for 6 months. So he basically spent 6 months at Carrington with the first team, helping the goalkeepers. And I asked him about training and kind of who stood out, and straight away he said Fernandes. And he told me that in goal, when Fernandes would hit it, he's got such a technique where it's almost deceptive, where when he hits the ball, you think it's going to go over the bar, but it actually just nestles under the bar and goes in. And that goal was basically what he scored against Edison. I know it was ruled out, but what a goal it was, and what a goal it would have been if it wasn't ruled out for offside.
Well, we had a great angle at it, and if you're like as amateur footballers as we are, or bad amateur footballers, if you could execute that shot in that position, it would have been the way Fernandes did it. And very few people are capable of doing that. And as I said earlier, a lot of players would have been crestfallen not seeing the flag went up and probably would have faded in the game, but he became more involved because that's him. And his bargaining hand was so strong, given that there was some interest in him before the FA Cup final. The fact that he was officially appointed the captain last year, that he won the St Matmos Player of the Year award for a third time in 5 seasons, I think it was last season. And also, some of his teammates who are on higher salaries than him were absolutely dreadful last season. Mount, Rashford and Casemiro, I believe, are all on a higher salary than Fernandes. And 2 years ago, when he signed a new contract, it was effectively to reflect his value to United and how brilliantly and influential he'd been in the first 2 seasons, because the expiry date was only extended by 1 year, and he was effectively a third of the way through a 6-year contract. But quite understandably, he deserved to be remunerated for his form in the first 2 seasons. The timing wasn't quite ideal because it was late March, early April 2022, and of course things were about to take a turn for the worse under Ralph Rangnick, and Fernandes did not have a good season that season. It's the only bad season he's had at United, but it's one bad season out of 5, and the other 4 seasons he has been from good to very good to great, you would argue. So with this new contract, he probably, there's a good chance that he'll become the club's, certainly the squad's highest earner. I think that's completely fair, given that he's been their best player over the past 11 years. He is the captain. He is their most influential player, as you said as well, and I've said it time and again. Wherever you play him, he performs, whether it's on the right. I know it's a penalty, but he scored in the FA Cup final, playing from the right-hand side. he's influenced games from the right-hand side. He's one of the best playmakers around. He has done very well against the best club side in the world, Manchester City, playing as a false nine. And arguably, having watched him there a few times, his best position is probably as a deep-lying creative midfielder. I think I go back to the Everton home game, I think, in Ten Hag's first season, in March or April 2023, I think he was absolutely phenomenal that day. And that's, you take all that into account, that is a great footballer. And okay, he turns 30 next month, but I think the days, as we've said before, where a player hits 30 and you think, right, they're on a downward spiral now, they're long gone. And Fernandes is one of the most durable players in the game. So it makes sense, even though United have been guilty of doling out daft contracts to players who've still got quite a lot of time on their deal before. This is a very different case. This is nothing like Victor Lindelof in 2019 when his agent made up interest from Barcelona, and the clowns who were running United at the time thought, we must rush and give this man a new contract, even though he's 2 years into a maximum 5-year deal. I mean, it's pretty staggering the more you think about it. It's one of those contracts that doesn't get the same level of attention as Marcus Rojo's in 2018 or Phil Jones's in 2019, but it is among the very worst that United negotiated. With Fernandes, he is completely, he's deserved every contract he's got, and I imagine that will be the case with the third one.
He's got the kind of quality, you could see him going into his mid-30s and maybe dropping back like kind of Toni Kroos or Luka Modric and going on for that long. I could definitely see that Fernandes. And you think about what Ineos are trying to do. They're trying to lower the wage bill. The new signings this summer, Lenny Euro, have obviously been put on, and Joshua Zirkzee been put on lower wages. But I mean, Fernandes deserves every penny of that, doesn't he? In that new deal that he gets, he's just been such a brilliant player. We'll leave it there for part one, and we'll be back in a moment for part two with some exciting transfer news. Welcome back to part two of the Manchester is Red podcast. Now, on the build-up to the Community Shield, there was potential. There was only going to be two senior centre-halves because Harry Maguire was an injury doubt, Victor Lindelof was an injury doubt. That's what Ten Hag confirmed in his press conference. But thankfully, Maguire was actually involved in the squad. Maguire, Johnny Evans and Alessandro Martinez started. Martinez was at left-back. But that just highlights for me why another centre-back needed to be signed. Thankfully, Samuel, Matthias de Ligt is incoming from Bayern Munich, along with Nasser Mazraoui. Ironically, both players have played under Ten Hag at Ajax. Both have Dutch pedigree, so they probably tick the wrong boxes. But they should strengthen the squad at a time when it really does need to be strengthened, because the transfer deadline is looming now. I think there's only around 18 days left of this summer window.
Yeah, he's a player that Ten Hag said that he wanted to sign 2 years ago, just before he joined Bayern Munich from Juventus. It's been a deal in the pipeline for quite some time. De Ligt's been expecting to join United for upwards of a month. I was told at the start of last month it was effectively done. Obviously, you're never going to write that unless you pretty much see the guy writing his contract at Old Trafford. Nothing is done until that very moment. But it seemed like a very easy deal for United to conclude, because there's not a big market for De Ligt. As Uli Hoeneß, the Bayern Munich board member, said, De Ligt is Dutch and the Manchester United manager is Dutch, and with De Ligt and Mazraoui, that will take the number of players United have signed under Ten Hag who were born in the Netherlands or who have played in the Netherlands up to 11. And that's the quirk of it. They've got a new co-chairman, they've got a new chief executive, they've got a new technical director, they've got an inaugural sporting director. Yet this is shaping up to be the most Dutch-centric summer they've had in the transfer window under Ten Hag, in that they've already signed, of course, Joshua Zirkzee. Mazraoui was even born in the Netherlands as well. De Ligt, of course, was Ten Hag's captained Ajax under Ten Hag. And it'll be fascinating to see what happens with De Ligt, because from the outside, it looks like they're signing a player based on 5 years ago rather than his form in the last 5 years. It's that United has taken a lot on in Ten Hag's working relationship with De Ligt, which I think is quite dicey. It felt like with Lenny Yoro, who was a signing that who didn't tick any of the Dutch bingo boxes, if you like. That he's not from the Netherlands, never played there, not represented by SEG, never played for Ajax. That felt like a very Ineos-led deal. And then United it feels like they've taken a backward step in signing two players who played for Ten Hag at Ajax. And clearly Donny van der Beek, who was an absolute dud of a signing, has not been that much of a deterrent. And you look at the players United have signed, these Dutch-centric players. Steven Railston has been by far and away the most successful, even though he's had 4 significant injury layoffs. I genuinely think Andre Onana will have a more dependable and better second season, but his first season was not a success. He let in far too many savable goals, and he cost United more than anybody else in the Champions League group stage. Christian Eriksen had a very good first season. He had a very bad second season. Tyrone Marshall has not played for United in nearly 15 months. Mason Mount, okay, it's a little bit tenuous. He was on loan at Vitesse Arnhem when he was a teenager, but Mason Mount and United has always felt to me to be a mismatch, and I've not seen anything to change my mind on that. Højlund, of course, is repped by SEG, and he really should be aiming for a 20-goal season with United in the Europa League. But I do question United signing two strikers from Italy with identical goal-scoring records, identical ages, and the pair of them costing £100 million, and neither of them being a proven goal scorer in a team that had a minus goal difference last season. And even players that I didn't get, of course, Frankie de Jong is probably the biggest example of that. So going back to 2022, he wanted to reunite De Ligt, Van der Beek and de Jong at United, which, there's no way United can seriously say that, there was a thorough process with the scouts, with John Murta and blah, blah, blah. Ten Hag has had quite enviable autonomy on recruitment, and he's still seemingly wields quite a bit of power, because there's no way, if United changed managers, that they would have been, for example, if they'd brought Thomas Tuchel in, they weren't going to be signing Matthijs de Ligt. Given that Tuchel managed de Ligt last season and he wasn't a regular for Bayern Munich. And you look at de Ligt over the last 5 years since he left Ajax, he only lasted 3 years at Juventus, who won one title during that time. His period at Bayern Munich coincided with them not winning the title for the first time since 2012. You look at his tournament performances for the Netherlands. He got sent off at Euro 2020 when they were eliminated by the Czech Republic. At the 2022 World Cup, he barely had a kick. He wasn't a starter. I think he only started the final group game. And then you look at the recent European Championship, he literally did not have a kick. He was behind Ake, Van Dijk, De Vrij, Mickey van der Ven as well. And I know the Netherlands, just going off that list, they've got some very good centre-backs. But certainly when De Ligt broke into the Ajax team and Ajax had that season, you thought he was going to be at the heart of the Netherlands national team for the next decade, and that's not been the case 5 years in. He's not been a regular in the last 2 tournaments. So clearly his form over the last 5 years, it's not compelling enough for any elite club in the Champions League to be scouring the market for Matthijs de Ligt at the moment. His reputation was still clearly pretty good after he left Juventus, even though it was quite premature, him going at that time. I always thought that wasn't the right fit for him, de Ligt going to Juventus. So you kind of give an allowance for that. But Bayern Munich should have been a pretty good fit, and Bayern Munich wanted to sell him after 2 years. And there's some deadwood at Bayern Munich, and Bayern Munich have wondered who's going to take this deadwood off our hands. There's the Dutch manager at Manchester United, wonder if he will. And of course, Ten Hag is gladly taking de Ligt and Mazraoui. So both of those players have really got to hit the ground running. They've got to have good starts. They've got to have good seasons, because it is very easy to be quite cynical about the manner of those signings. But also, it's not all on Ten Hag. The new hierarchy at United, I think, should have been, just as a point of principle, should have probably eschewed the the Dutch market. And I mean, Ten Hag is even, he's aware of it, as he said to AD. He said, believe it or not, I didn't recommend it, but given that he tried to sign him 2 years ago, it is a difficult one to believe.
Is the sliding doors moment in that regard not in the first week of July when Ten Hag's contract was extended? Because it was the same deal, just extended. He wasn't given a new contract with new details thrashed out. Perhaps if it was a different deal, the new hierarchy could have negotiated certain clauses, perhaps removed his veto, etc., and how Ten Hag operates. But I mean, this summer has just been more of the same, hasn't it? It's exactly the same policy. It looks like Ten Hag has been given a lot of power, a lot of influence in the market. And I thought it was interesting when Lenny Euro signed, it was kind of sold to us as the club scouts, the new football structure, and Erik Ten Hag agreed that Euro would be an excellent signing. Whether or not those words are used when De Ligt and Mazraoui come in remains to be seen. It is a very Ten Hag signing. Both of them for that matter. Obviously, they tick all the boxes, all the wrong boxes, as we've said. And I think we all agreed going into the summer market that United need to move away from that policy. So Ineos have continued to sign those players. And Ten Hag has continued to be given that influence. How that will pan out, we'll have to see. In terms of, we'll jump back to the Community Shield, Samuel. The City's equalising goal I thought was quite interesting because Facundo Pellistri was on at right back. I actually forgot he even existed until I saw him on the bench on Saturday afternoon when the teams were confirmed. We both agreed that Harry Amas should have started. He had a great summer, delivered a lot of mature performances in the United States on tour. He actually travelled down to London. He was present in the warm-up, the pre-match warm-up, but he wasn't on the bench. And I know this is clutching at straws. It's kind of hypothetical thinking, and you could kind of say anything could happen. But perhaps if Amas starts at left back, Dalot starts at right back, does that goal happen, as we said? Because Dalot would be at the back post to clean up that header. Like I say, it's all if my auntie had, she'd be my uncle kind of thinking, isn't it? But it is just a thought.
Well, I did say before kickoff that it was odd that there wasn't a defender on the bench, and of course that defender would have been a 17-year-old who's never played a competitive game in his life, but he is a 17-year-old who started with 3 games on tour and seemed to get better and better. I thought he had a very encouraging half against Arsenal. He got blindsided for the equalising goal, might have been offside, but it's a good lesson learned. That's the kind of harsh lesson you want a youngster to learn those games. Then he was one of the best players against Real Betis, and then for me he was the best player against Liverpool for United. So to take him out of the squad completely when United only had 4 fit defenders did seem extreme. Toby Collier is obviously a few years younger than Harry Amas, hadn't made his debut yet, but he was in the squad as we thought he would be. But it just seems like pretty pointless to me that Pellistri, who, as you say, until last Monday, he'd not really been a United player this calendar year because he, of course, went on loan to Granada in January. He's a player that they really need to be looking to sell before the transfer window closes because of his contract situation, because of the fact that he started about 4 games for United in 4 years. He's a good player. He's a good lad. He's a sellable asset. They should be looking to get a good fee for him, but they've got 2 right wingers. And look, I'd rather have Pellistri playing for United than Anthony, but it's not going to happen. It's just not realistic. So you've got to look at selling Pellistri. But I did find it very odd that he was among the first substitutes to come on Saturday. And then, of course, it was even odder to see that he slots in at right back. And, of course, Maguire, Ten Hag didn't want to take a risk with him. It was an hour and you're coming off. Fair enough. But if you're going to do that, and clearly it would have been planned before kickoff, have a defender on the bench. And he had a defender to choose from. He had one of United's best players on the tour. And for some reason, I asked him afterwards at the press conference, and he said it was about seniority. And I mean, that doesn't really wash. You need to try and have a defender on the bench. And look, Amas could have started that game and City might have torn him to shreds and could have won 3-0. I mean, Martinez didn't entirely cover himself in glory at left back, but of course he is a centre back by trade. But I mean, as we said as well, the irony is that Wan-Bissaka has an extremely good record at Wembley, and just as he's about to leave United, it's the one time where I would say that they actually missed him, because he wouldn't have got blindsided by Bernardo Silva the way Pellistri did. but Ballistri was a fish out of water. You can't really blame a right winger who's slotting in at right back getting done the way he did. He's all watching. Bernardo's a brilliant player. Blindsides him, gets the header, gets the equaliser. But it was a shame for United because it was so needless. I mean, you'd be more forgiving if 17-year-old left back started and they lost 3-0 than if you did what Ten Hag did and not putting a defender on the bench and then putting a winger at right back and then conceding quickly after scoring and conceding yet again in the final 10 minutes. It seemed easily avoidable.
And I mean, it goes back to Luke Shaw, though, doesn't it? Again, unavailable after playing for England at the Euros. I was listening to some fans. Well, I overheard them speaking on the train down, and they were just bemoaning his injury record. Some fans are just sick to the back teeth of his kind of absences that are going on at the moment. I mean, it's just not good enough, is it? It seems to be made of paper mache. Going back to Wan-Bissaka, I thought of him straight away in the first half when watching Diego Dallo at right back, who was struggling against Jeremy Doku. And my mind was cast back to the Carabao Cup final last year in 2023 when Dallo was struggling with St Maximin. He obviously got booked early in that game. He was hooked to half time. Wan-Bissaka replaced him. Wan-Bissaka had a stormer in that second half. Absolutely marked St Maximin out the game. He did it again in May. Wan-Bissaka at Wembley, as you said, he always seems to deliver at Wembley. He was fantastic against Doku. I know Doku scored, but I blame Andrew Onana for that one. He should have saved it as front post. So Wan-Bissaka's now closing in on an exit. Samuel obviously joining West Ham. Ironically, I think a few times on this podcast we've said that West Ham would be a good destination for him. But I mean, that was when David Moyes was in charge. He felt like a David Moyes signing. It's obviously now Julian Lopetegui at the London Stadium. So it's interesting that he's making the switch nonetheless. I think he can leave Manchester with his head held high because of those performances in the cup finals. I think his contributions in those cup finals were very good. Look, is he a 50 million player? He never was he? And he was incredibly limited going forward. That is well documented. But there have been some good moments for Wan-Bissaka in a United shirt, I believe. Yeah,
it wasn't without positives, absolutely. As you said, the performances in fact, in 3 cup finals, because I thought he was their best player in the FA Cup final when they lost to City in 2023. And he did have that tremendous record at Wembley. Mitoma in the semi-final against Brighton, he was very good against him as well. But there were some warning signs early on with Wan-Bissaka that he just wasn't a proper Manchester United player. And has he scored 2 goals for them, maybe, I think, and those goals might have also been during the COVID season as well. So I'm not sure if he ever actually scored for United with a crowd present. After 2 years, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer wanted to bring in Kieran Trippier, and Kieran Trippier was not going to come in and be on the bench, having just started in a European Championship final for England and won La Liga with Atletico Madrid. Ten Hag United wanted to get rid of Wan-Bissaka in summer of 2022. He was out in the cold until after the World Cup, and Diogo Dallo got injured. Wan-Bissaka came back in. He had a very good second half of the season, and that's why in the end United kept him last summer. But then last season, clearly Dallo was the better right back, and he's the more rounded right back as well. And it's got to a point that because of Wan-Bissaka's contract situation, logically he has to be sold, and United have to bring a right back in. For United's sake, it's important that Mazraoui is an upgrade on Wan-Bissaka. It'll be interesting to see how he gets on. I can imagine he's going to be a very different fullback to Wan-Bissaka in that. I mean, there was a friend sent me over the weekend. There was some daft Twitter account that suggested that Wan-Bissaka, based on their rating, had no weaknesses. I think that was the word they used, no weaknesses. Well, I can think of a couple. I mean, he can't cross. He gets done at the back post. He doesn't score many goals. He doesn't get many assists. And those are 4 big issues for a fullback in the modern age. So it'll be interesting to see how United get on with Mazraoui. Frankly, I've not watched much of him. I must have seen him live once or twice, given that he had Bayern Munich played against United last season, but I can't vividly recall anything.
He can play on either side, can't he? He can play at left back and right back, and also in midfield. So, I mean, when you look at him as a right back option and Dallo, who I think you are going to lack maybe a bit of defensive stability there. When you think of Wan-Bissaka's quality in one-on-one situations, I mean, that is his biggest strength, isn't it? You talk about his weaknesses, there is a lot of them, but that is his biggest strength. Yeah, are United going to be a bit exposed at right back now, potentially, because for all Dalot has improved and he had a really good season, excellent season last year, defensively, I still think he's a bit suspect sometimes. I still think he's a bit gettable.
See, I thought last season it was the other way around with him. That defensively he became better, and it was his attacking output that wasn't as impressive. When, of course, in his first years at United, he was defensively suspect, and it was his attacking capabilities that really stood out. It's about getting that balance right. I don't think you can just. He didn't have a good solid first half against Doku. He didn't have a good time, but it's all he got rinsed by him, and that has happened quite a few times. I mean, I think one of his worst performances for United was against our now Danjuma in the Champions League a few years ago when Villarreal somehow didn't beat United that night. But in fairness to Dalot, he did the virtual press conference afterwards, which I thought was a pretty good sign given what an awful night he had. I think those of us who sat in on it were a bit sheepish just to ask him about his performance, because it's like, what do you say after that? Yeah, you have had the good grace to front up for this virtual press conference, given that it was still that COVID hangover that we were having at the time. But it'll be interesting to see what they do, because I mean, De Ligt, having not succeeded in Serie A and the Bundesliga, it's a tall order to succeed in the Premier League, and it's an extremely tall order to succeed as a Manchester United centre-back in the Premier League as well. But maybe with Casemiro venturing forward as well, Ten Hag is like, if we have more of the ball, then we don't have to defend as much, which sounds like quite the risk to take. But if United can pull it off, and if they can become a dominant, proactive, possession-based side who create chances, have more of the ball, they're not, that whole chasm between the defence and the front six, they can address that whilst having the ball not getting caught out, then that is a remedy. It's a risky remedy. Whether it will come off or not, I don't know. But De Ligt's a good ball player. Mazraoui, having played at Ajax, is going to be in the same ilk somewhat, albeit as a fullback. But perhaps that's part of the thinking. Ten Hag is using the words game model quite a lot now, which of course is coming down from the hierarchy. But I certainly that chance Rashford had in the first half on Saturday, watching it back, I think there were 16 passes before it got to him, and literally every United player touched the ball up until Rashford put it wide. It would have been a great goal if he'd finished it. It would have been a phenomenal team goal, given that it literally they went from back to front, and every player got on the ball, and the passing exchanges, the little dummy from Fernandes right at the end of it as well. That was a glimpse of what United can do, but we must caution, it wasn't the Community Shield. I saw someone a little bit oblivious. They said, it was nice watching United against City and not feeling anxious. They didn't feel anxious because it was the Community Shield. It's not the Premier League, it's not an FA Cup final, it's the Community Shield. And so there were some very, as we said at the start of this, there were some very encouraging signs, and now the test is to do that against Fulham on Friday night in a much more competitive environment.
Yeah, and City without the best players weren't. I mean, pardon me, their representatives at the Euro 24 final hadn't come back to the Etihad yet. John Stones, Kyle Walker, Rodri, for example, they were all absent on Saturday. Another positive though, Foden as well. Another positive was Samuel was Casemiro. I mean, I sat on the podcast on Friday and said, look, the ideal situation would be proves everyone wrong with the season, bounces back to his levels in his first year at the club. But it was a real positive step in the right direction for Casemiro, who has had the benefit of a full pre-season under his belt heading into the campaign. He's obviously not been away on international duty, so he looked really sharp. And you're right, he was better in more prominent positions. There was some lovely intricate play around the box that he had a role in. I mean, there was a few short passes with Ahmad, wasn't it? When Ahmad should have shot, he passed across the box to Mason Mount, and that one didn't come off. But so I thought that was really good from Casemiro actually on Saturday.
Yeah, if United still received a 30 million offer, they would absolutely take it. There's no two ways about that. But he does look fitter. He has had a full pre-season, as Ten Hag noted afterwards. The interest from Saudi clubs has subsided. I mean, they're looking to younger players. They are clearly consciously trying to avoid attaining the tag of the retirement home that the MLS has had for 2 decades, pretty much. So that has counted against him. He did probably seem like an easy sell at one point, but in the end, I think United are probably going to be saddled with him, if that's the right word, for at least one more season. And we shouldn't forget that he, as Jamie Carragher said in that analysis of him post-Palace, that I agreed with at the time, I probably still agree with, and most people would have agreed with at the time. He has been one of the best midfielders of his generation. And it was noticeable during his first season just what an attacking asset he was for United. On his full Premier League debut against Everton, he played that brilliant pass through for Ronaldo to score the winning goal. And the majority of the United players that night, they went to Casemiro ahead of Ronaldo, which, I mean, it's Ronaldo anyway, so they're possibly bound to give him a swerve and go to Casemiro anyway. But it was clearly a reflection of the brilliance of the pass from Casemiro, and he came up with some really big goals in that season. Of course, not wishing to rub your face in it at all, but the League Cup finally got the winning goal. Bournemouth towards the end of the season was a big goal. The night that United qualified for the Champions League, he got the ball rolling against Chelsea. So
his heading's brilliant,
isn't it? He's a better attacking. Yeah, it's
something that I didn't know he had in his locker.
He's clearly a much better attacking midfielder than everyone thought, and that's because for most of his time at Real Madrid, he was flanked by these two maestros called Modric and Kroos. So he didn't exactly have his work cut out with those two either side of him.
Maybe the answer is just to play Fernandes in the number 6 role and play Casemiro in the number 10. Is that the solution to United's problems going into the new season? Maybe there's a piece in that.
Anything can happen. We've seen with some United team selections that anything can happen. So
we'll end with a word on Toby Collier, Samuel, because another positive contribution I thought from the youngster. Mm-hmm. He's had like Ahmad, a really good pre-season as a young player. I've said a few times since we've discussed him in the last few weeks, he's probably not someone I've looked at and thought, yeah, he's going to break into the first team. But I think physically he definitely looks capable of cutting it in the Premier League against more experienced players. And he's definitely got a role to play, I think, this year, doesn't he? Because he's not going to go out on loan. So I think it's exciting things to come from Collier.
Absolutely. And United said to us when we spoke to Collier, Harry Amas and Ethan Wheatley in San Diego that those three would stick around with the first team. That there was no indication they'd go on loan. I think that was pretty obvious anyway. And then at the weekend, the 3 of them were added to the first team section on the club website, which reflects their status. It's deserved and is logical as well. What I liked about him when he came on at Wembley was that he got on the ball very, very quickly. He played 4 quite quick passes. He drew applause from United fans with a couple of them because of the intent that he showed and the eagerness. And when we spoke to him in San Diego, he said how he's a really busy player, but he needs to improve on the ball. And I thought, well, what good lad? I don't think any of us would have gone to him and said, you work on the ball as that area you need to improve. He offered that up. He said he needs to improve that. Speaking to people who dealt with him, his mentality, his professionalism, absolutely spot on. Ten Hag has clearly taken a shine to him. He's seen something in him that others maybe haven't seen. That's happened before with the Man United midfielder. I mean, Scott McTominay was, I hesitate to say, an ugly duckling of the youth team, but he wasn't a player that you looked at academy level and thought he'll get a chance in the first team. But Jose Mourinho liked what he saw in him, brought him into the first team, and Scott McTominay is still a Man United player, 7 years on, having contributed to some successful times for the club as well, and he's had a very good career so far at United. So best of luck to Toby Collier. And they do need some fresh legs in the midfield as well. It's an area that the average age does need to be brought down, with Eriksen and Casemiro turning 33 this season. McTominay, of course, is very robust, but where they've still not signed a midfielder, which could prove problematic. I think if they don't get one over the line, given the state of that department and how, and the issues they certainly had there last season as well, having some fresh legs in there, although he will need coaching. And there was one point where Ten Hag asked him to come over and just gave him some tidbits during the Community Shield. I think with more exposure with the coaching, he will get there. So he got his new contract last month, and Ten Hag insisted on attending it. So the game on Saturday, that was just another step in the right direction. He's had a tremendous year just from his involvement with the first team towards the end of last season and getting the contract, doing as well as he did during pre-season, starting tour games, and then making his debut for United against City at Wembley. That's great going for him.
Yeah, his physicality for me definitely has helped them a lot. And you speak about McTominay, he was the same. He's built for it, isn't he? You look at him now, and he kind of was one of the tallest in the dressing room. I think about Dango actually when I look at Toby Collier, because technically I'd say he's a better footballer. They are different players who play different roles, but Collier's now kind of leapfrogged Go a little bit. Go's obviously on loan in the season, got an injury. He had a freak shoulder accident this summer, so it'd be good to have him back. But it just shows you how some things can happen in the academy and how certain players can overtake others in the first team pecking order. Anyways, that'll be it for today's podcast, Sir Samuel. Pleasure as always.
Likewise, Stephen. Thank you very much.
And thanks to the listeners. Hope you have a great week. We should be back on it'll be Thursday actually, ahead of the game on Friday night.
It will.
United kick off their season against Fulham at Old Trafford. Take care.